Hello and welcome back to AmourologyEd. My name is Krista. I do sex and alternative lifestyle education. And today we're going to be talking all about lesbians. Yay! So we are going to be covering kind of a wide variety of topics, but along the lines of being really in depth regarding the word lesbian. So we're going to talk about what a lesbian is. We're going to talk about the history. And then we're also going to talk about some stereotypical types of lesbians. Let's get started. A lesbian in today's society is most commonly used to refer to a homosexual woman as opposed to a heterosexual woman. The word lesbian actually comes from the name of a Greek island called Lesbos. In ancient texts, there was a 6th century BCE poet called Sappho. Now, Sappho was put in charge of educating a group of young women on this island. And little of her poems actually survive today, but the poems that we have recovered have a common theme. They oftentimes talk about women's daily lives and their relationships and their rituals, and it proclaims her love for women, which is kind of where we get the modern connotation from today. In fact, lesbianism as a way to describe erotic relationships between women wasn't actually used in any sort of sense until about 1870 when it was finally documented as having that use. So when we're talking about throughout history and persecution, lesbian women have not had the same freedom to explore those types of relationships as homosexual men. However, they also haven't had the same persecution or harsh punishments that were dealt out. Through much of history, lesbians were regarded as women who went against the social norm, as women who didn't adhere to regular female roles and standards, and oftentimes they were actually designated mentally ill, a designation which was finally reversed in the global scientific community since then, but it took a really, really long time to get this reversal to happen. Instead, lesbians were kind of thought to be this frivolous, not really important, not comparable to heterosexual relationships, and so not worthy of punishing because it's just these silly girls doing their thing. It wasn't really until the second wave of feminism in Western society that sparked the debate about whether or not sexual orientation was to be defined in the scope of lesbianism. So people weren't really talking about sexual desire or sexual orientation up until this point. Before then, it had again been used mostly to describe women who didn't adhere to the female roles. Today, in modern society, lesbian is used kind of as a wide variety of things. It's used to describe people's sexual identity. It's used to describe their sexual behavior, regardless of their sexual identity. And it's used to describe people's sexual orientation. And it's really important to note that these three things are completely different from each other and are not dependent on each other. Some women who engage in sexual relationships with same-sex partners would not describe themselves as lesbians or completely reject the idea of being lesbian or bisexual. Other women's self-identification as a lesbian may not align with their sexual orientation or sexual behavior. This is all completely okay. Anybody can identify as a lesbian, regardless of their sexual orientation or sexual identity, or regardless of whether or not they've ever actually been with somebody of the same sex or another woman or whatever. It's a feeling that you have, and that's super important to distinguish. Now, given that, there are some stereotypical styles of lesbianism, and we're going to talk about those. The first one is lesbian feminists, and this is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Women who identify as both lesbians and feminists, and they kind of take this to that extreme and create an identity out of that. There are lipstick lesbians. These women generally present pretty femme, so pretty feminine, and are generally attracted to other feminine women. They like girly things, they like lipstick, that sort of stuff. Again, you don't have to adhere to this stereotype in order to identify as these things. This is just kind of the general idea. Some people identify as something that they call a community lesbian, wherein they just don't fit into one of those boxes, but they still participate within the communities. Then there's a dyke. This one you have to be really careful about. It was originally created as a slur and has kind of since been reclaimed by a lot of the communities and a lot of the lesbians. And however, even though it has been reclaimed, it's generally not okay to call someone a dyke unless they've given you express permission to do so. Even if they identify as that way and you've heard them refer to themselves that way, I would still steer clear of calling them that unless you've specifically talked to them about it and in what connotation and in what setting that would be appropriate in. Then we have a butch. This is also another kind of iffy one, not quite as iffy as dyke is, but it can often be used in a derogatory way, so please be careful about how you're using this. But it's generally used to describe a woman who has stereotypical masculine tendencies or a masculine acting woman. Or it could be used to describe a dominant role in a relationship as well. Well, that is it for today. Thank you again for joining me. As always, you can find me at AmourologyEd. You can find me on all social media at AmourologyEd. I'm getting ready to start a Patreon, I think. So if there's something you're interested in as a reward for that type of thing, please leave it in the comments because I would love to know what people want, I guess. What would be a good reward for that? And if you like what you see and you want other people to be able to find this, then hit the like and subscribe button. And thanks again.